Time to take a look at your money here on Good Morning Quad Cities. But first, here is the weekly stock market recap. The S&P 500 is up 0.8%. The NASDAQ is up 2.3%. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 0.5%. In the first 6 months of the year, we saw some increase in stock market, but over the past month, the stock market has quickly reversed course and once again on a downward trend since mid-July. The S&P 500 has fallen by nearly 5%, while the NASDAQ index declined by 6%. And joining us is our financial expert, Mark Ravicheski from the Quad Cities Investment Group. Good morning.
Morning to you.
Good to see you on a Monday.
Yeah.
What do you think is behind this sharp decline?
Well, all this volatility we've seen in the stock market for, really the last year and a half is over concerns of high inflation, and the Federal Reserve then being forced to aggressively raise interest rates to help get that inflation under control. Now, back in January of 2022, David, the stock market reached an all-time high. Everybody was jumping up and celebrating. But then we get this very sharp decline in the stock market for most of 2022 on the concerns of the impact that high inflation, that rising interest rates would have on the consumer and ultimately the U.S. economy. Now, in the latter part of 2022, David, the stock market, as you mentioned, does start to rebound on the expectations that, okay, the worst of this inflation is behind us. And maybe this inflation problem perhaps maybe is going away. But then in July, David, we start getting more and more economic data that indicates that this fight against inflation is far from over. If you remember, in July, inflation jumped from 3 to 3.2%. In August, that inflation rate may even go higher. So this current pullback in the stock market we're seeing reflects Wall Street's concerns that, one, inflation will remain problematic, and therefore the Federal Reserve will be forced to keep interest rates higher for longer as it tries to get this inflation under control.
Yeah, we've definitely, of course, been seeing it. I know you've seen it at home. We were just talking about mortgage rates now sitting at like 7.23% this morning on average for a 30-year.
22-year high for those interest rates, David.
Yeah, that's scary. Well, it's another big time. People going back to school. People, of course, they can't afford to not buy school supplies. So how do you think retailers are going to be impacted with this?
Well, the retail industry's projections for this year's back-to-school shopping season, David, one can say they're very optimistic. For back-to-school spending, which includes children in elementary school through high school, the retail industry expects to generate $41.5 billion in sales, up 12.5% from last year. For back-to-college spending, which only includes college students, the retail industry expects to generate $94 billion in sales. Look at this, David. Up a massive 27% from last year. So again, very, very optimistic projections for this year's back-to-school shopping season.
It's optimistic, however. Is it really that people are spending more, or is it because they're having to spend more because of the inflation?
That's kind of the big question.
Because pencils are still pencils.
Pencils are
calculators
still pencils. You still need all of that stuff. Well, look, despite high inflation, rising interest rates, overall, David, consumer spending has remained, I guess you could say, fairly strong. But again, we've kind of been bringing up this point. At what point, David, do consumers simply tap out and say, no more?
Yeah.
Savings accounts are dwindling. Household debt is at a record high $17 trillion. Within that household debt, David, an all-time record high $1 trillion in credit card debt. So asking consumers to, again, meet these lofty expectations might be a challenge for many families.
Do you think they're going to be able to meet those projections, and what happens to retailers if they don't?
Well, if you look at the July retail sales data, and we're seeing more evidence that people are starting their shopping a little bit early, even in July. 0.3%, retail sales were up 3.2% over the last year. That's quite a bit different than up 12 and up 27%. from these projections. So we'll see how the August retail sales data comes out, but boy, these are lofty.
Yeah, yikes. All right, Mark, thank you so much. We're looking forward to see that update in August then. All right, and here is a look at what's coming up on GMA.